All right, so I'm going to go through these first few faster than normal because I want to get to what I'm going to call the Bernie Sanders statistics, which were brought up at last meeting, and I want to make sure we go through those thoroughly because I bet everybody's heard them. So just briefly, because many of you have heard this before, real wages, so purchasing power, is the highest it's ever been in our history, with the exception of this fake pandemic peak that we had that was distorted by all these millions of low-wage workers disproportionately losing their jobs. So you ignore that giant peak there in 2020. Compare back to 2019. Throughout the Biden era, despite inflation, wages grew so fast that we always had more purchasing power than we had under Trump before the pandemic. Nobody knows that. It's a carefully guarded secret, but people focused on that decline, that number coming down, and not the fact that it was still higher than it's ever been. It was higher than 2019, and when you zoom out, that's where we are. That's the last few years. We're higher than we've ever been. Even higher than the people that want to go back to the 1970s. Our real wages are higher than that. And real, again, means inflation adjusted. All of these numbers are in 2024 current dollars, or 2024 dollars. The benefits over the last few years were at the bottom, actually, of the income spectrum, meaning people at the bottom got bigger gains than people at the top, which is highly unusual. And this is from Aaron Dubé. It's an NBER paper. It got a lot of coverage in the media. He's a labor economist. Again, highly credible information, vetted. Congressional Budget Office, our favorite analyst group, said we got more purchasing power in 2023 than 2019 across the income spectrum. All of the quintiles, so every 20th of the population slice had more purchasing power in 2023 than 2019 because incomes outgrew inflation. The chart on the right is saying how much less of your income you had to spend how much less of a share of your income you had to spend to buy the same stuff you bought in 2019. So it annoys me that they use the negative on the chart, but it's saying you needed less a share of your income to buy the same stuff. And almost all the key measures of net worth, the stock market, home prices, all the things that are measure net worth way outgrew inflation, which is at the bottom. So from the fourth quarter of 2019, before the pandemic, to the fourth quarter of 2024, the net worth of the bottom 50% doubled. It wasn't a huge number. It went from 30,000 to 60,000 approximately, but it doubled. And again, the stock market nearly doubled. The home prices went up 50%. So if you're one of the 2/3 of the people households that own a home, you were happy to see that your $300,000 house became a $450,000 house. All of these things outgrew inflation, including the wages. The real median household income, meaning half of the households make more, half make less. So it's not distorted by high outliers. It's that median, half above, half below, as you may have heard, for many years was flat from about 1999 or 2000 all the way to about 2015. You didn't have a big sustained increase. But then in those last couple of years of Obama, through the Trump era, and then you saw us hit the peak, 81,000, and then it fell off a little bit, but it's just below that now. It's about 80,600. So it's just barely below the all-time record in 2019. So at the median, households have never done this well in terms of inflation-adjusted income for a household. Now, getting to the Bernie Sanders statistics, they say, yeah, but Dave, and Carl, and you can't just tell us all these things are at a record pace and record number. They've all outgrown inflation. 40% of people can't cover a $400 emergency expense. So this is one of the two big statistics that Bernie uses, the other one being paycheck to paycheck, living paycheck to paycheck, which I'll cover here in a second. So the $400 emergency expense is from the Federal Reserve, so highly credible source. And 63% of people can cover it out of what they call cash or their cash equivalent, meaning you could put it on a credit card and you would pay that credit card off with your next statement, meaning you are in a very good position to pay that off. 63% of people can do it. So 37% can't, and you hear it simplified as 40% can't cover, that $400 payment. When you dig into this a little bit more, about, of that 37% who can't cover it, this table tells you kind of what are the reasons behind that. So 16 of the percent could put it on their credit card, they just couldn't pay it off right away. And that's 16 out of the 37. It's not 16% of 37, it's 16 percentage points of the 37 percentage. And so they give you a list here. They borrow from a friend, they have to sell something. There's only 13% that truly cannot pay it at all. They have no idea how they would cover that 400. They just couldn't do it. The Fed comes at this with another similar question where they say, could you cover an expense of $500 out of your current savings? And about almost 70% of people say they could do it. And so the way they explain it is they say, the people, if it was 30% or 63%, they could cover it. This number is slightly higher because some people are not going to spend it out of savings. They would rather put it on a credit card and pay it off over time than touch their emergency savings, which makes logical sense. But still, so this number, 68% could cover it. The other number was 63. So still in that ballpark, somewhere in that 30 to 40% range of people still struggle with a basic, fairly, what I would consider to be a fairly small hit of $400. That's a big deal to 40%-ish, 30 to 40% of the population. When you do a little math with this, and I'm asking the question here in a fancy way, how do you get that number to be 100%? What would it take for 100% of people to be able to cover that $400 expense pretty much easily? And the number is 120,000. So right now, real median household income, which I'm showing here, is about 81,000. That would have to go up to 100,000 for 80% of the people to be able to cover that $400 expense. It would have to go up to 120,000 for 100% of people to be able to cover that expense. So it's a very good, the math is very strong here in terms of the two things being related. The real median household income, as it goes up, the percent of the people that can cover the $400 expense also goes up. And that's what the graph shows in a fancy way. But still, you would have to take the income, the real median household income, up by 50% from 80,000 or 81,000 to 120,000 for everybody to be able to cover that. And there is just no way that the economy is going to do that. The way you have to get there is you have to redistribute. You have to tax the rich more and pay for stuff for the middle class. You have to pay for their education. You have to pay for their health care. You have to pay for their lives in some way. The economy is never going to get to 120,000 in our lifetimes. It's going to take very long time to get there. And so it's just not realistic to look at the economy and say, you can get there that way. No matter what you do with the economy, you got to do it with policy. It's going to take redistribution from the rich to the poor to, get people out of this, to be able to handle these types of hits. The second statistic is the paycheck to paycheck. Do 60% of people really live paycheck to paycheck? And there are different groups that study it. There are different definitions, but the range is anywhere from 26% that live paycheck to paycheck all the way to 60%. And the first one, Lending Club, is the one that you see a lot. The YouGov is a much more robust marketing. It's a bigger firm. And then Bank of America, of course, is a giant bank and does a study actually looking at the huge number of people that have bank accounts with them. And they survey them. And so you've got two different theories here, or right at the beginning, sort of, you can do it by looking at how much people save. You can do it by how much of their spending is on true necessities. And you can look at kind of the level of their emergency saving, which was what the Fed did, was sort of number 3. So this page talks about the first two a little bit more. And you can read it, but I'm going to get down to the Bank of America piece. 50% agreed or strongly agreed that they're living paycheck to paycheck. And about 26%, though, spend 95% or more of their income on necessities. And the Bank of America listed this all out. And there's a very good article from Matt Bruning at the bottom there that I recommend you all read to take a look at this. I believe it's not paywalled. It's in a magazine I haven't heard of called Jacobin, but he's a pretty well-known journalist. The about this paycheck to paycheck question, and he goes through the different studies. But so somewhere 26 to 60% is a pretty big range. And so it depends on how you define it. But this isn't the only way to look at it. There's another good way to look at it. Let me jump here for a minute. This is at the 60th percentile of income, they have about 57 days of savings. 50 days of income or expenditure in their savings, and it's about 46% for non-elderly households. So most people aren't as rich as the elderly, believe it or not, and it's not they're not in as good a position. And so the 60% overall is not a crazy number. So when Bernie Sanders says 60% live paycheck to paycheck, there are various ways you can measure that to get there. But if you do use this on spending on necessities, it drops that number quite a bit. And the Fed does alternative measures here as well. They use different ways of looking at it. 50-ish% doing pretty well. The Fed Shed report in the middle, 54% say they've got enough to handle 3 months of expenses. So this 50 to 60% range is not crazy. The one argument I will put out there, though, and this is why I think these numbers seem high to me, especially now, is that when you make more income, you will raise your lifestyle. And so when you get a bigger job, you will get a better car, or you will buy a new wardrobe, or you will live in a bigger house. And so the whole idea of the paycheck to paycheck argument is problematic for me because of that idea. And people's lifestyles, people spend on average about $100 a month on streaming services, for example. I've seen different estimates of this, but somewhere between on beverages, if you add up alcohol, cigarettes, non-essential foods, so potato chips, Coca-Cola, it adds up to about $3,000 or $4,000 a year on average. And it's a little bit more for the lower income families in terms of a percent of their income because they make less. So there is a lot about lifestyle that gets baked into this. But as Americans normally perceive the world, these numbers that Bernie Sanders talks about, 40% of people that can't afford the $400, that Fed statistic, 60% of households living paycheck to paycheck, you can support that number. Those are high, but they are supportable by the evidence that's out there. And you guys will have more time to read this presentation on your own, and I hope you read that Matt Brunig article on it. So while Carl and I say there are all these records being set, people will raise their lifestyle to go with that. And so this percent of people that live paycheck to paycheck, I don't know that there's an easy way to really move the dial on that number tremendously. I mentioned earlier here that you're talking about a 50% increase in pay before everybody could cover a $400 expense, which is kind of crazy, right? I mean, how could we have that large a real median income and still and require that to get everybody to cover that expense? So that's a kind of a quick survey of the Bernie Sanders literature. It's not crazy. It's a counterpoint to all these records that Carl and I are sharing, but keep that lifestyle idea in mind that people will elevate their lifestyle for their income.